Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 25th lecture of this course. Today, we are going to discuss the various steps which are concerned with the sample design. Yesterday, we had begun with the concepts of sampling, and today we are going to concentrate on the steps in sample design in this lecture. As or we should know that all items in any field of inquiry constitutes a universe or population in statistical terms. If I have mentioned already that if we are studying the level of satisfaction of students from teaching at any university, then all the students of the university constitute the universe or population of this study. Whereas, if the objective is to, or our study problem is to study the level of satisfaction of students from teaching in a particular department, then all the students enrolled in that department are going to constitute the universe or population. A complete enumeration of all items in the population is known as the census survey. That is, if we study one and all items, one and all members of the universe or population, it is a census survey. And in fact, in such an inquiry, in the census inquiry, all items have been covered. Opinion of all the members of the population has been taken. Their response regarding the problem has been sought after. So, there is no element of chance left and highest accuracy is to be obtained. And even the slightest element of bias in such an inquiry will get larger as the observation increases, because if there is some problem. Whereas if we are going to do the sample to study a part of the population or the universe, then of course it is left to some error. The census survey involves great deal of time, money and energy. Therefore, as the field inquiry is large, this becomes difficult to adopt because of the resources involved. We have already discussed yesterday that only the census survey is taken by the government. Otherwise, for such a large population, it is very difficult. So, if the population is either infinite, then some sample has to be taken, and if it is finite and small, finite and large, then also sampling has to be done. And if the population is small, then we can of course make a census survey. As in the case of inquiry about studying the problem of satisfaction among students of a class, there we would find that the population is small, maybe 100, 150 or 200, then we need to go for a census survey that is involving all the members, all the students, and seeking their response to the kind of teaching that is undergoing in the department. Whereas if it is a study of knowing the level of satisfaction or by teaching of university, in the university, whole of the university has 50,000, 1 lakh students, it is not possible to go for a census survey because it would require lot of the human resource and of course lot of the budgetary expenditure, so it becomes difficult. And this is why it is practical, it is not practical for the researcher to go, it is not practical for the researcher to go for a census survey. And this is why government is the only institution which gets the complete enumeration enumeration of its population. Even the government adopts this in very rare cases, 10 years, once in a 10-year or that. This is why if and further if there is the universe is a small, then also we should not use a sample survey, we should go for a census survey, as I have told about the level of in case we study the level of satisfaction of students in a department. So, when field studies are undertaken in practical life, consideration of time and cost almost invariably leads to a selection of respondents, that is the selection of few members of the population, few items of the population. The respondents who have been selected must be representative of the total population, and it has to be a mini representative or a miniature of the population, and that is the beauty of sample, because as we know that the findings of the sample have to be generalized for whole of the population. So, if the sample that we have selected varies widely from the characteristics of the population, then it would be not wise enough to generalize the findings of the sample for the whole of the population. Then why do this exercise? All the exercise has gone in waste, and this is why a sample has to be selected in such a way that it is representative of the population. So, the respondents whom we have selected to a study, they are called in technical terms a sample. And the selection process through which we have selected is called the sampling technique, and the survey is so conducted is known as sample survey. So, the respondents who have been selected to a study, they constitute sample, whereas the process through which they have been selected is the sampling technique, and the survey that would be done is called the sample survey, if it was because it has been done on the selected respondents, and that is the sample. So, in terms of algebra, if the size of the population is n, capital N, and if a part of the size small n of this population is selected according to some rule for studying some characteristics of the population, the group consisting of these nn units is known as sample. The same thing I have explained to you earlier. Researcher has to be careful in preparing the sample design of his study or her study. He must plan how a sample should be selected and of what size such a sample would be. The sample size has to be determined before the data is collected, and of course there are many designs from which a researcher can choose. But again, I must remind you that the researcher should not do this on his own judgment, but rather there are formulas to calculate the size of the sample. One should go accordingly, and also the researcher has to see that which sample design would be most appropriate for the kind of study that he or she is doing, and this is how they should go for the sample size, and this is how one should go for the sample design. The researcher has to prepare a sample design which has to be reliable and appropriate for his research study. The following are the steps of the sample design which we are going to discuss. So, while developing a sampling design, the researcher must pay attention to the following points. This we call the steps of sample design. Number 1, the objective. The first step of sampling design is to define the objectives of survey in clear and concrete terms. The sponsors or the researchers of survey should confirm that the objectives are commensurate with the money, manpower and time limit available for the survey. So, if we do not clearly define our objective, then the sponsors, they will have problem in assessing our requirements. So, what are the objectives for this survey? That must be in clear and concrete terms, because survey involves expenditure, large expenditures. So, and the objectives also must be very crisp according to the problem of the research. So, if we are suppose doing the studying the performance of commercial banks, then we have to state the objectives, because according to the objectives of survey, we have to seek the support. And of course, if we do not define the objectives of the survey, then we would also not be very accurate in our proceeding to the collection of the data through the sample survey, because then we will be traversing wildly for the collection of data, whereas even collection of data must be very precise for the issue or problem that is at our hand. So the objective of the survey must be very clearly stated. Then the next is the population. In order to meet the objectives of the survey, what should be the population? This question should be answered in the second step. The population should has to be clearly defined. As I said earlier, that if it is we have to study the satisfaction level of students in a university, then all the students of the university constitutes the population of our study. Whereas if we have to study the satisfaction level of students from teaching in the class, then in a department, then all the students of the department, they have to be considered and defined as the population. So the problem is same, but since the objective is different, we have to define the population differently. Suppose we are studying the performance of, say, public commercial banks or private commercial banks, say in India. So all the branches of public banks or all the branches of the private banks, they would be the population in this study. We are studying the performance of commercial banks, all the branches of commercial banks, they constitute a population. And if we are studying the performance of private commercial banks, then all the private commercial banks, they constitute the population or universe of this study. So for all the studies, we have to define our, say, our problem of research. If suppose we are studying we are making a comparative study of, say, government schools in Delhi and government schools in UP, Uttar Pradesh, or any other state, then we have a population of the government schools in Delhi and Uttar Pradesh or whatever state we are taking for the comparative study. So that constitutes our population. If we are studying, say, the security of girl students in any campus or any university, then all the women students, they constitute the population or universe in this our study. So it is very necessary that the researcher makes it clear what his or her population or universe is for this problem of research that he or she is going to tackle. Then comes the sampling units and frame. A decision has to be taken concerning a sampling unit before selecting the sample. Sampling unit may be a geographical, such as a state, district, village, or construction unit such as house, flat, or it may be social unit such as family, club, school, etc., or it may be an individual. So the sampling unit, see, when we were concerning the satisfaction of students, their students were the sampling unit. Whereas if we are studying, say, the development of infrastructure in the rural areas, then village would be the sampling unit. So that way we do it. Or if we are studying the sanitation level in the various wards of a municipal corporation, then of course the municipal wards are the sampling unit in this case. So the sampling unit has to be decided in a in the very beginning, because that will help us. Then comes the size of the sample. The size of the sample is also very important, because this, if we are doing a very large sample, then also there would be no backing from the time and the budget. So, and if we take very small size, then also it may not be representative of the population that we are going to study. So, this size of population is very important. This refers to the number of items to be selected from the universe to constitute a sample. And this is a major problem before the researcher. The size of sample should neither be excessively large nor too small. It should be optimum. An optimum sample is one which fulfills the requirements of efficiency, representativeness, reliability and flexibility. That is what we have been, or we shall be discussing in detail also, how to determine the size of the sample. But then, as we discussed that if we take very large size of the say population to make a sample, then it does not make sense, because after all the method of sampling is adopted to make the research feasible in terms of finance and in terms of human resource. And if as large sample we take, it moves towards the census survey. And of course, as we know that it would not be feasible for the support from finance or the human resource, because as big sample, as much requirement of finance and the human resource support. Further, on the other extreme, it cannot be very low also, too low also, because if it is too low, too small, then the characteristics of the population would not be transferred to would not be reflected rather to in the sample. That is also that would become a futile exercise. So neither the sample has neither to be excessively large, neither it has to be excessively low. It has to be optimum and to the size which fulfills the requirements of efficiency, representatives, reliability and flexibility. And for this, of course, in any of the other lectures, we would be discussing how the sample size is determined, and what are the parameters or what are the factors which determine the size of the sample. So next is the parameters of interest. The statistical constants of the population are called as parameters. That is population mean, population proportion, etc. When we do census survey, we get the actual value of parameters. In determining the sample design, one must consider the question of specific population parameters which are of interest. If we suppose we require mean, either we require proportion, we require variance. So whatever the parameters we require, we have to consider the sample design accordingly. So the population parameter has to be given an important consideration while developing the sample. The next item is the data collection, because all the information that is collected must be relevant, and while collecting the data, the surveyors and those who are collecting the data must be very careful that no irrelevant data is collected, and of course no essential information is discarded. The objectives of the survey will determine the mind of the surveyor, because of course if we are collecting unnecessary data or irrelevant data, number one, this would result in wastage of our resources, and secondly, this would in fact lead our results in a way which we do not like. These irrelevant data may influence our research process. So this is why, and of course the relevant data, the essential information, essential data has not to be discarded also. So while collecting the data in the sample, the surveyors or those who are working on the project collecting the data must be very careful, and this is why we knew initially in the course that those who work on research, they have to be fully trained. Even the those who do the work of surveyor or who join the project as surveyors or in any capacity, they have all to be trained, because if they are not trained, then their immaturity would result in such kind of problem. But if they are well trained, then they know which data is irrelevant, which is relevant, which should not be discarded, and that way our data collection exercise becomes a very fruitful exercise. Then we have the non-respondents. Because of the practical difficulties, data may not be collected for all the sampling units. This non-response tends to change the results. The reason of non-response should be recorded by the investigator. Such cases should be handled with caution. After all, we cannot force the respondent to respond. We cannot force. The researchers cannot force on the respondent. If we are working on, say, the level of satisfaction among students from teaching at the department, there may be many students who do not want to respond. So we cannot force them to respond. Or if there are, say, we are working on various other issues like the divorce or even the drug addiction, there are very high chances that the respondents may not respond, because they do not feel very comfortable in responding this in responding to the collection of the data. So we have to be prepared for that also. The reasons have to be recorded and this has to be handled with caution. And then the selection of the proper sampling design. The researcher must decide the type of sample he is going to use, the type of sampling method. The researcher will be adopting or sampling technique for the collection of his data, and so this has to be decided. The researcher must decide about the technique to be used in selecting the items of the sample. In fact, this technique or procedure stands for the sample design itself. We have random sampling, we have non-random sampling, and in those we have so many kind of sampling techniques. It is the researcher who has to decide what kind of the survey or the sample technique would be useful for his research, and of course this has to be logically justified. There are problems in which there is no option but to go for the non-random sampling. There are problems in which there is no option but to go for the random sampling. So it depends upon the topic of the research and the insight of the researcher which type of sampling technique he is or she is going to adopt for making his or her sample for the study of the population that is given to him or her. The next is the organizing field work. What is that? The success of a survey depends on the reliable field work. There should be efficient supervisory staff and trained personnel for this field work. And as I have been repeating times and again, that in any scientific study, those who are conducting it in any capacity have to be trained. Then comes the pilot survey. It is always helpful to try out the research design on a small scale before going to the field. This is called a pilot survey or pre-test. It might give the better idea of practical problems and troubles. We have developed the question array. We want to collect the data. So let us do it in a small scale. And once we do it, then we would be finding that some questions, relevant questions have been left. Some questions which are not so necessary have been included. And there are some questions which are very difficult. And there are some questions from which we cannot say control the other questions. So once we do the pilot survey, that is survey on a small scale, on a small level, then the problems associated with the research design of the question, with the research design or with the question array would be revealed to us, and then that is where this pilot survey or pilot study is very important. So it is advised that those who are conducting research, they must do a pilot survey on the survey design and on a small scale, so that the limitations of this is very clear, and then they are improved to be implemented on the larger size, on the actual size of the sample. Then the final is the budgetary constraint, cost considerations. From a practical point of view, we have a major impact upon decisions relating to not only the size of the sample but also the type of the sample. This fact can even lead to use of a non-probability sample. Budget is the most important thing when our students they pursue MPhil and PhD. Then the budget, either they get JRF or they get some fellowship from Indian Council of Social Science Research or CSIR, or even the non-net fellowships are also given to the research scholars. So that is, and some expenditure on for the books and other items, contingency expenditures. So the budgetary constraint is very important, and if we go for a project supported by, sponsored by any organization, then again the issue of budget is very important. So the everything has to go by the budget. If budget allows us, we can go for a large survey, we can go for a non-random sampling. If budget does not allow, then we can go for a non-random sampling and a small survey. So the budget is of course very crucial in deciding the sample design. Now we discuss quickly the characteristics of a good sample design. The sample design must result in a truly representative sample. That is, the sample must contain all the characteristics which are in the population, because after all this has to be the results of the study has to be generalized for whole of the population. Then the sample design must be such that it results in a small sampling error. We cannot say that in sample there would not be error. We consider error to be 1%, to be 2%, to be 5%. So the sampling error should be very small as say 1%. Again, sample design must be viable in the context of funds available for the research study that we have already discussed. Sample design must be such that the systematic bias can be controlled in a better way. This bias is very important because this is a bias which go on from beginning to the end, and so the sampling design has to take care of this also. Further, the sample should be such that the results of the sample study can be applied in general for the universe with a reasonable level of confidence, and this is what we have been doing. This all has been done in fact to acquire, to make a sample which can give results in such a way that these results can be generalized for whole of the population, and the confidence level is maximum. There is 99% level of confidence where the error is only 1%, 98% confidence level where error is 2%, 95% level of confidence that is error is 1%, meaning that what does it mean that? It means that if 100 times this experiment is repeated, then 99 times the same result should come, and this is being generalized, so for the whole of the population. So that is, it means that we are sure that 99%, 98% or 95% the results truly reflect the characteristics of the population. So we have discussed steps in sample design and the characteristics of a good sample design. I am sure that I have been able to make it clear to you. Thank you very much.